So welcome everybody. This is our first meeting of the policy committee, and it's primarily an organizing meeting and also to get us set up to be able to be here. Let's start with introductions. And if Jackson, you could share how PPS representative will engage this year.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackson. I'm very education. So we heard the policy. And as of right now, we don't really know if it's on policy committee. That's still kind of under in the works right now. We'll probably know. Hopefully, we have a meeting Tuesday. As we do Monday, hopefully figure that out. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Maybe you can make something else.
Yeah.
I'm Bailey Lowry, one of the directors on the school board, and this is also my third year on the policy committee.
Greetings, I am Shanice Clark. I'm the Director of Community Engagement, and I'm here to support
I'm Rachel Lent. I'm a paralegal in the General Counsel's Office, also part of the support team.
I'm Mary Kate. I am senior legal counsel, here to support as well.
Liz March, another lawyer for the committee. We're here to serve.
And I'm Michelle DePass, the chair of the board this year and a member of the policy committee.
We also have Herman Green is another member of the committee. He is not here today, so I'll be bringing him up to speed. Hopefully, we'll have a recording. Thank you much. Terry and Kara and our guests. Introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Terry Proctor, Communications Department, screening the meeting.
Kara Bradshaw, getting assistant for the board office.
I'm Mike Rosen, and I'm just.
I'm Jake Hummel. I'm a parent volunteer.
Great, thanks for joining us today. So setting up just our committee meetings this year, we're going to follow the same cadence we had last year, which is about every 3 weeks. Last year, the meetings were 3 hours long. We decided that this is going to be an overachieving set of committee members, which means we're going to prepare in advance. So we're going to do our work in 2 hours versus 3 hours. I heard a lot of support for that. So
We are with you on that.
pardon me.
It's kind of a little bit hard to hear. If it's just me.
It is hard. And then also Kara has to leave at a certain point, so we'll really, the recording will be that's the meeting. Okay, so the other thing is we're really going to try and get the materials out in advance, and the expectation, since we're not having 3-hour meetings, is that committee members will look at things in advance. If you have significant, I'll be checking in with committee members, but if you have significant issues, flag them in advance and come prepared. Let's see, we also are going to strive to, when we post the materials for board members, that we will post them also to the public. So that there's more of an opportunity for people to know what we're working on. In addition, the committee meetings will be from 4 to 6, which is after school. And there's no ideal time for parents, really, actually. But hopefully, this will allow potentially an opportunity for parent and community engagement. We also are going to try and have a mix of virtual meetings and in-person meetings. So that, again, we might have more opportunity to work through and get broader community engagement sometimes with having virtual meetings, but we'll make sure and post that. And I apologize today if there was a misunderstanding. People thought that we were having virtual meetings. And then the last thing is we also, hopefully working with Terry and team, will be able to, and the board office people will be able to provide public comment virtually versus having to drive to PPS, having in-person meetings, having to drive to PPSC or a 10-minute agenda item, but they then get 2 minutes to speak out. So really trying to provide more opportunities for people to engage. And then lastly, the work plan, I hope to have a draft work plan that will probably remain draft all year because it will be fluid, but bring it to the committee and I'll already had conversations with some of you, some committee members and staff, but just what are the things that we need to do, what are things that people are interested in doing. And so that our work plan reflects kind of not just the things we need to do, but also potentially things that people feel strongly about in terms of our policy work. The other thing that I'd like to do is maybe a conversation with Shanice and her team is, how do we engage the community earlier? So it's not sort of a baked product that comes out of like, here's our committee's work, and then now we're going to go reach out to the community. So how can we pull that in at an earlier stage in the process? So I'm looking forward to doing that. And that'll be a little bit different and may feel different for people, but I think that will actually make our work not more efficient, but I think we'll go through less iterations if we get that's community voice earlier in the process. Today's agenda, we have a couple things that we're going to go through. One, just an overview of the policy and policy development process. So people have just a base understanding of that. Liz is going to walk through that. And then we're going to have an initial committee discussion on what I thought would be hopefully an easy topic, but something that this is a need to get done. We have 3 vacation policies that are either not aligned or in conflict with current practice, and then there's a current practice that's labeled as a policy, but it's not actually a policy. So this is kind of an administrative, hopefully cleanup, but a good opportunity for the community to start looking at the community process. We also have a discussion about the climate policy, which is probably one of the biggest items that was left with the last policy committee. And then discussion about, hopefully not a long discussion about some proposed rescissions. So this year, one of the things, to committee members about this, but we have a lot of policies on the books that are either duplicative, dated, they don't have anything actually in them, or they just reference another document. And that we started this cleanup 3 years ago. Being honest, daily. Is that 3 or 4 years ago?
It was before me that you started.
Okay, so it was 4 years ago. And we actually cleaned up out a lot, but there's still a fair amount in there. And when you have those in there, it makes, when people see those in the policy manual, it makes them like, I think, stop paying attention to the policies we want them to pay attention to, because they're like, this thing is 1971 and it's like so out of date. This whole thing must be out of date. So we're going to start doing some of those, and the practice will be, and we'll see today. So we have 4. I sent them out in advance. In the future, when they come out, if you have an issue with them or a big question, or like, I don't think this is like something that's going to be a 2-minute discussion, then you just flag it and we actually won't move it. But what I'd like to do is we have those, we have them on the agenda. If nobody has any major issue, the committee will refer them out for a first reading of the rescission actually at the meeting. So I'd like to do that today, and we can kind of practice if somebody's like, oh, this is like, I actually might have an issue with this, rescinding this, which case we'll be like, okay, that's not an easy one. We'll move the other ones, and this other one, we'll see if we can answer your questions. And if it can't, it's more complicated. So that's, I think that'll be just a standard part of our committee meetings. Liz assures me she's got a bunch in the pipeline. And then we'll have public comment. So with that, Liz, do you want to sort of kick off like how policymaking works at PPS, or the board's role, staff's role?
Yes, and we'll sort of ground the discussion in that there's a policy on policies. And please let me know if you can't hear me, because I feel like I'm yelling, and I also know there are fans and masks, and so I'm not angry, I'm just trying to project. Although it's stinking hot in here, I just want to know if it works. The AC is not working with the AC today. I do really like Julia's framing and an overview of the policies, and to think about the structure and why they need to be up to date and why you want to have clear focused policies and get rid of those that are distracting and out of date, because you want people to be able to find information and to be able to get their questions answered. And anyone who's looking at a policy manual, say manual including the online version, is because they're trying to find the answer to a question and you want them to be able to find it. Those are the people who are interested in following policy. So it's a nice ecosystem. So how do we think about and support that ecosystem? And the board's role is, the board owns the policy making process, and policies, as we've seen over the course of the time here, like, they can take some time to work through. So you want them to be, they're not evergreen, but they are long lasting. They are statements of principle. They are delivering the values of the school board and how they want to see the work done in the district. They are ensuring compliance with state or federal law in many instances, but not always. There are schools of thought where OSBA, for instance, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in the OSBA process, thinks the policy should only exist if they are reflecting positive law. And I actually think that's too narrow of a lane. And I think this board has made some really important policy statements. The professional conduct policy, for instance, has many policy statements in there that aren't going to be found in a statute, but it's important to set expectation and tell the community what's important to us and how we protect children, for instance. So this, there's also an administrative directive on policy. And as Julie and I have been talking, and we've had conversations before, but most recently, part of the work of the policy committee, I think, is to help make sure the lanes are clear. Right now, the administrative directives, which are the pieces that the superintendent is responsible for developing that implement board policy, tells, in some regards, the board how to do its policy work, which is a little bit backwards. And he agrees with that, by the way, it's a little backwards. So the policy committee, and you all, most of you know this, so I really asked you to give an overview, but I almost been through this, but the policy committee will make its policy recommendations to the full board. The policy will arrive at the board for a first reading, a notice to the public that there is policymaking happening. There is a minimum of a 21-day public comment period, and that's a time for engagement and feedback. And oh my God, we didn't think about that, or what about this other thing? And if there are significant changes, then that 21-day period starts anew. But that is kind of the most public airing of the committee's work, and the recommendation from the committee that gets passed out to the full board to adopt it. After that 21-day or longer period, incorporating whatever feedback, the board votes, a policy is enacted, and then staff under the superintendent's direction will look at any related administrative directives. Does one need to be developed that doesn't exist? Is there an existing one? Does it need to be amended to reflect the new or amended policy? And are there other pieces? The ADs are not the only thing that exists underneath the policy manual umbrella. There are employee handbooks, there are other procedures and other parts, there are guides on the website. I mean, so it's thinking about what is that path? And then how are those changes communicated out to affected people? Sometimes that's just a narrow group of employees. Sometimes it's the entire PPS community. That really depends on the scope of the policy. I don't think you need me to walk through every page of the AD that needs to be amended and parts of it incorporated actually into the policy, but I think those are the highlights, Julia.
Yeah, I think the other thing in the AD that's I think worth noting is that anybody can propose a policy.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it's like, yes, it is the board's work, but in some ways it's somewhat like the legislature, in that any constituent can contact the legislator and ask to have a bill drafted or pitch a concept. And the AD is pretty clear that it's been the practice that anybody, a board member, so you don't even have to be on the policy committee, or a community member, a parent, staff person, a student, can propose a policy. That doesn't mean that the policy committee is going to do anything about it. But it will get consideration as like, this is something that a majority of policy committee thinks, so we should take up. And we'll
The climate crisis response policy is a great example. That draft came from it's in the community. Yes.
Well, and I think the DSC policy is another example of this where I think some of the expectation was the DSC was going to write the policy, give it to the policy committee for us to approve. But it's really this generative process where, somebody may propose a policy and then together we work to think it through with legal, with community engagement. And so it's not that the draft that shows up here is the final one. I mean, climate has gone through all sorts of stuff that where we talk through things and refined it together. Because that's our work. So I think that's the other trade-off is that I think to be clear that just because someone proposes a policy, that's not final draft is going to go before the board, but the work of this committee is really to dive in and to ask the questions to make sure it's a policy that works for all of the people.
And I think to that point, the formal community engagement, as well as all the informal feedback that may come in, as well as consulting with internal, external subject matter experts, is all in furtherance of the committee members and ultimately the board's policy. And so lots of interaction with the committee members and the board about what voices do you need to hear from in order to affect your policy making is very helpful to the process and also to staff and help facilitate that whole so.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, Ailey. And I also want to just make clear that it's not an exclusive, if you're on the policy committee, you don't have your board member. But there's lots of great ideas, of things, I get lots of emails from people, the vast majority of people I don't know who have an idea about how to do things better. And often they've done a fair amount of research or have some sort of personal experience that is pretty compelling. So
that's why policy is my favorite. It's because lots of people have different ideas that they bring to this committee, and then together with even more other people, we think about it. And I think that's what's so great. This really, for me, is what I hope school board would be, that sort of community collaborative process of creating a future forward for PPS.
That's great. I like, it's a great selling point. And I think it's like an ideal way of moving things. I have a quick question
We get
about
to debate commas too and argue about commas.
I want to have less of that. Just drink everything
Just
We're happy to put them in where they go off.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You say we, Mary means Liz is happy to do that.
That's why we can go from 3 hours to 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's the Scrivener's edits. Sorry, Nicole.
What's your question?
around the 21 days, is that an Oregon
No,
statutory?
that's the current structure.
That's in our AD.
That can be modified.
Okay, I was asking about that because you also spoke about when the community can learn about these things. And so that might be something to consider. Just speaking from community organizing, it can take longer than that to get ideas out. And I think we want to strengthen our policies that come out of this group by hearing and being informed by what community members have to offer.
Yeah, well, this either could be a nightmare or a blessing for Shanice. I think it's such a missed opportunity when all we do is notify one representative party group and then that's it, and then nobody comments and then we hey, we must have done a good job because there's not comment. But I would hope that way earlier in the process we would have engagement. So more people proactively pull it in.
I think that, we don't want it to be a nightmare for anybody, but we also do want to get feedback. And half the time, if you have kids and you're raising kids, you don't even, it's hard to keep up with everything. I'm just wondering how we can be, it's a question that doesn't have to be answered today. How can we be more intentional about
Yeah, and I think the 21-day,
advertising, like, this is coming up, starting on this date. It's like that whole, the government, they want you to comment, but you have to like look for.
You have to go to the Daily Journal of Commerce and read
Yeah,
that.
read the little notice that's on.
well, oftentimes by the time we get to the first reading, we've already done quite a bit of community engagement. And these meetings are public, but we also like, I'm thinking about our search and seizure policy. Shanice and Danny and others did extend, and DSC, that was when Maxine was our rep. They did extensive community engagement before we even wrote the policy and as we were writing it. So the 21-day isn't the only time the public can engage. But so I think it's that hybrid of not just sort of formally announcing that there's this structural comment period, but really doing that deep work of inviting voices in to help shape the policy.
Yes.
Which is what happened with the looking at our real estate policy, right? It was
Yes,
having deep talks with some of our partners to say what's missing, how can we make this an anti-racist real estate policy? And we talked about, what does it mean to be landowners and how do we acknowledge stolen land, and we talked about a lot of things, and really worked hard. Danny did a lot of work with Native American partners before we even got to the 21-day reading. So I think it's both ends.
yes, absolutely.
And so how do we make that 21-day reading? I think Julia's right. We just announce it. And unless people are really deeply engaged, they don't see it. So how do we make that more public and also do what you're talking about, that deep work with people to help co-create the policies so that when we get to 21 days, we're refining something that's already been community-built.
Thank you, that's perfect.
I should also note that, just like another change into just like reflecting just a different way of doing things is, I don't anticipating having formal like sub-work groups, because that then became just like another scheduling thing. So again, the expectation would be we get our material out in a timely way, and that committee members like review the materials and be ready to become actively engaged. And that way, we shouldn't, there can be some ad hoc work, but I don't anticipate like having a subcommittee of the work. And I also appreciate, I think the other opportunity maybe to flag work is that with you were chair, that you had committee reports during the board meeting, which I think is another opportunity to flag like, hey, we're working on this. If you're interested, like more details to come, contact us. As another way that I think that's one thing I'd like to do this next year. And then we're gonna have policies that probably nobody cares about except for a very small set. So in case it's not necessary to do.
Or where there's a legal requirement to put it in by a certain time. I mean,
Right. Do we have any of those this year?
we're making a change like to the administrative directive of one thing that it's a.
But that's
None that we can identify in this
Not yet.
meeting. I would
Yeah.
never want to tell you, guarantee that there isn't one.
Yeah,
But if there's not any from last legislative session, so it'd be from the Tuesday, and then, I'm sorry, the February one.
Presumably, yes.
Okay.
Just,
So this could actually be a discretionary year, that we can do the things that we want.
I don't think there'll be, I'm not expecting a big volume we don't know about. I also know that we have strikers sometimes.
Okay. Any other questions about the policy versus ABs, anybody's role? So next steps is we'll have a draft work plan just at the very highest level next meeting, and then we'll also have a maybe a draft of a new policy on policies, which would be 7.0. And getting rid of the AD altogether, right?
I don't know if you need to be skinny down. I think we can decide that. We can see what's left.
Okay.
To the extent it companies' expectations about administrative directives, that's an appropriate piece for the superintendent to direct staff to, but
Okay.
not direct policy.
And that might be worthwhile when people see how that works.
Right, so I think we'll have to get into.
Okay. Anything else on that agenda item? If not, we'll move to the topic that I know, like, only one probably is really good first.
Do you want any update on the OSBA process?
yes.
itself? We've been,
So maybe, Michelle, maybe provide a quick overview of the process and an update.
right, so OSBA provides a model policy manual for districts to use, and it has some really nice attributes. You have some consistent numbering and structures, and you can get updates when the legislature passes laws, and then you know exactly where to go. We looked at that 3 years ago, I think now, and the decision was to try a hybrid approach, which is to take the benefits of the manual and draft on the expertise of OSBA, but not to adopt the model in its entirety, and to not shift our numbering to that model, but to try to map the OSBA manual to the PPS manual so you could track updates and you have the benefit of their significant expertise. It's turned out to be a very slow and tedious process, and the rescission work was paused to have that be done as part of the OSBA work. And I think in having done that for 2 years, I think we're better off just getting rid of the outdated policies when we can, and continuing to try to extract the advantage. Now, we use the OSBA manual for updates. We use it, we consult with it when we're looking at policy changes. It's a reference point, and we'll continue to offer some suggested revisions, but I don't think marching through it policy by policy, chapter by chapter has proven to be very efficient or yielded a lot of substantive change. So that's where we
So are we using their numbering?
no
We're not using the numbering, just using the
content.
content.
Although we do attempt at times, and you'll see in some of the newer policies, where we will reference, if there's a comparable OSBA policy, we'll put that, the equivalent in the policy.
That helps us track. It's not always a one-to-one match. So sometimes we have something that's not there. Sometimes we have something that looks kind of like it, but is different.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very similar. We're trying to figure out how to be most efficient, mostly for the updating mechanism that comes through them. So
That sounds very reasonable. I mean, very useful. It should take some utility of the updates.
So one thing, it's a future, maybe topic that I'm interested in is just compliance with the policy. So we spend all this time crafting the language and the commas and everything. And it used to be, when you walk into school, there was this big green book that principals would say, if I didn't know what to do about X, I'd look in the policy manual. And it's not clear, based on some practices, whether that is the research, what is the policy? Or should I be instead going to look at, some internal website? So I'd be curious, I'd be interested in making a conversation about, there's no sense us doing a lot of policy work or having policies that people are complying with. Then if they're not complying with it, is that an issue of creating legal issues, or is it not reflecting the values of the district? So I think compliance with, you want to have policies that are important and that people comply with. I think that's good for legal compliance, and it's good for values shining through in the district about what's important. I don't assume that people aren't using the policy manual that's online. You have the ability to search in some ways that are. I think it still needs a lot of work. It still needs to clean up. There are a number of ways to improve the accessibility to information to people who are looking for it. But I actually think it's easier to find online. And that's where our principals and building admin know to look for information on the PPS website. So I have no data to back it up, Julia, but I think I want to have a high degree of confidence that people know where it is. But the manual that's very hard to update in an office. Just take papers out. Yeah, that's the old school.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's some people's will be, but I think there's a pretty strong migration to the online version. What our job to do as staff is to help identify the path to make it even more accessible and more usable. And if you're reading about one topic, how do you find information that would be helpful to you that may not be in the policy itself, but is related to the thing you're like, you may be looking for when you read that policy.
And maybe this is something, again, a future topic, but having like HAPSA or some teacher reps, like parents, like just a focus group of if, how user-friendly is it? How could we like, just whether people even know if it exists or where it is, just so that we're not just doing work with a small group.
Let's see, I mean, in the digital age, it's more important to know where to find things. And I'm wondering if, linking also,
That's what we do a lot of.
the linking piece is really key. And I wonder about, I know not everybody attends PTA meetings, but on a kind of community level, how could we provide visibility to the manual?
Yeah, and I think good titling, good links, good cross-references, and honestly, the way people read short, succinct statements, approachable language, all of those are.
More pictures
And
and text.
Yeah, headings, so if you're trying to find something inside an 8-page policy, how can I get what I'm looking for and not give up before I get to it?
Is that manual in other languages besides English? Just curious, or?
Yeah. Right, no, it's a big.
Never too late to ask.
Well, this is also why like the rescission work is important because like people actually do, like I always amazed, like I looked in the policy manual and I found that you should be doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, what?
I mean, when you ask people from legal and HR, you hear a lot about policies, but I think it's fair to ask people outside that groups.
Okay.
Well.
Well, that's maybe like more as committee members, that's like ways in which we can just, not so much like getting in compliance mode, but just a more of a, having it be a useful document that reflects our values. Okay, so the next agenda item is the vacation policy, and this is really sort of designed to be a little bit of a warm-up exercise for our committee work. So currently there are 3 policies that represent either vacation or holidays. One is 5.70.052, it's work year vacations. Then there is 5.50.064, religious holidays teachers. And then there is 5.60.031, which is vacation eligibility and scheduling. So those 3 things, and actually the last one, the 560.031, is links to the administrative employee's terms of employment. So just vacation leave for non-licensed administrators should be granted in accordance with this policy. So if we're updating a policy, that will catch another one. So we have 3 policies, and then in addition, we have another document that was posted that is titled at the very top it says PPS public schools non-represented vacation policy, and that says current policy. But in fact, this is a practice, right? It's in the HR manual.
I don't see that. Advised, okay. That was the one that says vacation eligibility and accrual rates, 260 days.
Yeah,
It's posted on the HR
HR.
HR page on the website.
It's not a policy though.
It's not a policy.
No, but it's posted with our board material.
Yes.
I just, what you read on the top is not what I have on the top.
It's, that is not the most recent. I don't know if you have an older version of it.
I
So
think you have an older version, because ours says revised.
if you look on the bottom, it should say 2017.
I have the one that Sharon sent me.
I
Does
think
that say
there's a-
2016 or 2017?
So there's a
It's the older one.
2017 version, which we have on board books.
Okay,
Yeah, so that's not the one that is
but it's actually
current.
not,
Yeah,
No, but it's what
It's not a
HR is
policy.
using, right?
right, it's a practice.
It's a practice.
And it's in conflict with our policy. So, in the pre-discussion, we talked about is most of the vacation actually for most of our employees is set by the contracts. So actually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is primarily for non-represented employees. Which probably would be important to have as part of the headers. And so, if you think about it that way, it's probably should be nestled in with the other administrative or non-rep employment policies. So that would be a good idea to have it be in the 0.31 because it's written somewhere else. And rescind the other two. I mean, and then figure out what the base policy is.
Right. I would rescind the older vacation and the religious holidays or teachers policy. And then revise the existing one for the board is defining how vacation schedules are set.
And then we had another discussion about setting it so that you have values and a process and like who it applies to and some definitions, but not if you've been here 6 years, you get X amount. So taking the specifics out. And instead of having a process like this is how the board approves non-representative, just like we approve everybody else's policy by when we approve the CBAs.
So would that allow HR some, like they could make changes to how much vacation time people got, as long as it was in alignment with the board policy, so the board policy didn't have specific hour amounts in it? Is that what you're thinking, or?
Not quite. Just, at least this is how I think about it, which is just like we set values and a process, and then the contract comes back to us, and we approve of something very specific. Is that it would be like so there's a process laid out, and the first time, and it'd probably be likely a resolution. The first time you set the baseline, you have a resolution like according to X number of policy, the board adopts this vacation schedule or whatever it is, paid time off. And then once you pass that, then if say HR came back and said, hey, we have a retention problem and or an equity issue and we want to change it to X, you change it by resolution, not through this long policy process. So
That's
It's providing some flexibility.
exactly.
yeah, but the board still approves it, just again,
In a different,
what's most important is this is like the group of employees, like the part of the group that there's the highest level of accountability for, because it's going to be the highest level paid employees, including some mid and low wage paid employees, but the highest paid employees in the district. So the board should be accountable and have some oversight. Is that, sorry, did I?
That's what I think that's a good
so Liz,
governance
could you say
structure.
again which ones you thought we should rescind? So the religious holidays for teachers, and then is it the work year vacations? Is it
It's
five?
the 052.
5-2 or
Go
That is the
5-2?
work year vacation. It's the one that was adopted in 1971.
We should rescind that and then just revise vacation eligibility.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. That's what I thought you said, but I just wanted to, I've learned not to assume.
And we probably though will do those rescissions as part of when we have a new one.
That'd be.
When we have a new policy, then we'll, okay,
Right, it'll be kind of a packet, like,
great.
they go together versus if you rescind something, people think you might be taking something away, you're not rescinding something else. So based on that,
And just to be clear, the religious holidays one is covered under a contract because it's teachers, right? So that's why we don't need that policy.
Yes.
and there was a little bit of a discussion, and this may be a bigger values question about you have vacation and then there's sort of a number of different things. You have paid time off that's for non-represented employees. If you have vacation, you have sick leave, personal days, and holidays.
And floating
Sec-
days.
Yes,
the personal days.
Personal are the.
But there hasn't been a lot of staff discussion.
right. But they're kind of, it's a group of.
It's what?
It's a group of like, those are benefits
Yeah.
for,
There are different categories of leaves,
right,
paid and unpaid.
yes. Which could interact, because if you're just looking at like the vacation, it's like. Just that. We'll see what the draft comes back, but there's a number of different ways, paid time off, categories for non-represented.
Do non-reps also get 2 days to, floating that could be used for religious purposes?
Yeah, I believe you have personal days. Don't you?
Sharon's gonna get that.
They also get personal
Yeah,
days.
there's the one,
Sharon's gonna get that for us.
The non-reps get 3 personal days a year, 24 hours total.
Okay. Multicultural staff.
Yeah, I just am curious about, I know that especially for some of our senior staff, there's a lot of expectations for attending conferences or groundbreakings on Saturdays or, and so when someone, so that they're not like 40-hour employees, and so that is part of it, but I do think there's something about culture of burnout in the district, and that we have people who are working lots and lots and lots of hours, and then maybe feel like they can't also take time off, so I'm just thinking about how do we think about when we are having staff who are doing a lot of above and beyond, how do we ensure that they have ample time to then take off?
So I do think that Sharon, as the head of HR and the superintendent, have been working on this issue in terms of in the the surge of the pandemic, giving some reprieve to expiring vacation, but not waiving it forever, because they actually want people to have incentive to take time off. So I mean, I think Sharon should be here, but those have been some very live conversations in the last 18 months to think about workforce management, engagement, and support.
Well, and I was very surprised when I was working on the negotiations for the superintendent's contract, that there are other superintendents who, if they work a Saturday, then get like extra time, so that there are some contracts that are set up for fewer days than what probably they have, so that there's all sorts of different ways to look at time and time off. Just as we consider.
Yeah, no, I think
important to
it's
think
very
about.
important. The burnout is real, and we need to figure out how we can support staff in that work-life balance.
So there's a couple things. One, like private sector strategy is also like, when you allow people to accrue year over year, it becomes very tempting for people just to accrue it and not take it. And also managers have a really important role to be really clear, like, we expect you to take time off.
So there are caps on accruals. I just want to be PPS. There are caps on.
Right, yeah, but it's like 2 years, and I guess, so it looks
more
different.
for the
It looks
more.
different. Well, it's different in every.
Yeah. But I think the current practice, right, from HR is probably the most reliable.
But it's like in conflict with policy. It violates our policy. Anyway, we gotta get it figured out. So we get a potential draft to have a discussion at the next meeting. Are there any questions that people want to? Jackson, speak up if you have some questions about this topic that or information you want to have our next discussion about.
I'm representative of the district office.
What?
Typically district office.
Like
Not
principals?
necessarily. There are some non-reps in school buildings also.
And also involve the principals and APs.
The administration.
So what would be helpful for me is, I guess, if there were things that were done by resolution, to have those in advance, just so we have the history, and then if there's something also, other things that are in the HR manual that are relevant.
So there's not an HR, there's an employee handbook that's online. There's an HR page for employees to access and get information about benefits. So when you say HR manual.
I don't even know what to call it.
Okay.
I guess if there's information in other places that would impact this topic, it would be good to know like what people's expectation, like, hey, I read that you can accrue your sick leave or.
I think it's primarily on the HR webpage, and so you can go down and look.
Yeah, I don't, so if we are talking about vacations, which is not sick leave, then, I mean, I want to get you the information you want, but I'm trying to, the questions are to understand what you.
Yeah.
If it's everything about every type of leave, that is way bigger than vacation, so.
And the resolution, you wanted resolutions in advance. That's what I wanted. My question was, what do you mean by that?
Well, I
Historical
guess-
resolutions or when something's coming up?
Like, okay, for example, how did we get a practice that violates the policy? Like, was there a resolution that was passed that said, we're gonna do this? And so it became the practice by resolution, in which case that would be.
Mary has located some of the 2016 resolutions and will provide those.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like sort through like how we got to
Yeah.
unwind it. And then where does all that stuff reside? Because we didn't know.
The resolutions remain on the board page, so that's where I went. Okay.
None of us was here in 2016, so.
Right, and that's one of the, yes, it's always one of the difficulties, trying to figure out who has the historical.
But we've talked with HR about making sure that, for instance, any vacation schedule that the board were to adopt by resolution would note on that document, like our policies do, resolution number this, effective this date.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to go, we are kind of, it's not a straightforward process to.
But this is a great opportunity for us to develop this kind of new
Protocols,
systems,
practices.
yeah, so that it is easier, so that in 10 years when somebody comes back and says, how'd we get here? We can at least hopefully have.
Yeah, consistent, repeatable process.
Yeah.
Any other questions or information people need? I have one final question. I could not tell what the practice meant. Effective the carryover, effective June 30th, the number of days carried over at the end of each fiscal year shall not exceed 2 years of accrual allowance. So does that mean you have a rolling 2 years? And at the end of the year, if it's over 2 years, release it?
So
You can
like,
stop accruing after you reach the cap.
so if I was in like year 6, if I had more than 20 days, if I had more than 40 days, then I wouldn't use anything over 40.
You stop accruing.
Yeah. Okay, so.
It's I want to say, because it's my understanding, Sharon and Stacy were not able to be here because of that meeting going on down the hall. And so I want to the people actually administering it. I answer, but that is as we looked at this, a related issue a few months ago, that the accrual stops, nothing is taken away, but you're not getting more. So it's a loss.
Right. I mean, that's a huge motivator.
Right.
Like a lot of places I've worked, it's like, who wants to work for?
Right.
So like you start getting people like, I'm gonna take every Friday off.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Maybe other definitions that would be helpful, because I know these are all different. It's like one defines administrative employees in grades 20 to 24, like just a definition of heat supplies.
Right.
So the next item on the agenda.
So will that be, what's our timeline on that? That'll be something we need to have.
I'm trying to bring that back in 3 weeks. Or do you want to vote the rescissions out on the other two today?
Yeah. But not these rescissions.
No, you want to do the rescissions at the end, but not these rescissions until we have the.
Yes.
So she doesn't want to do the vacation rescissions until we have a new policy.
Right. Are there other holiday policies?
No,
There's not any other.
no, we don't do that.
That's just through the county.
The calendar, there are multiple work calendars. The other thing, Stacy texted me, so she must be watching this from the meeting. Is it, when you think about non-represented employees, like principals who have a shortened work year, they don't accrue vacation the same way because they don't work a full 260-day year, they work a 233 days. So it is important to define not just non-rep, but who's working how many days.
Their calendar day.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're like teachers don't accrue vacation in the same way because they have the summers off. They have some time, they can take sick leave, personal days and other pieces. But vacation is different because it's 182 days.
Or 192.
192. So it's non-rep they're differentiated groups in the non-represented category. So.
Okay. So the next agenda item is the climate policy. And there was a draft that was posted with the committee materials. And if you look at last year's work plan, the discussion about the climate policy started in December and had a number of sessions through the year. With a fair amount of, before the policy even came to the committee, the group that brought the policy had a fair amount of engagement. Even before it got here. And then there was a fair amount of engagement by the committee and so Amy or I were in
We weren't on
the
that.
sub-work group. I don't know, Liz, if you want to describe part of that or Mary, what happened with the subgroup.
On the climate policy, sorry, this is something to say, so it's not vacation thing. She's multitasking from the meeting. Way better than I.
Yes, you are.
I'm not
Yeah.
multitasking today.
Yeah.
What did you want to know about the subgroups in the?
I was just saying with the climate policy, so we've had it in the committee for a long time. And there was some community engagement by a list and I think.
Right.
So
They
people
kindly sent an email with a list of all the collaborative partnerships.
yeah,
that
who
were
like
in this.
weighed in at the first draft, and I think there's been pretty significant also adjustments with staff as part of that, and like getting it into like our policy language. And then what I was saying is neither Amy or I were on the subject.
Right.
So I don't know if you were or
I attended those and Mary attended. There was a pretty large group. So there was I would say that it incorporated, I mean, we're in version 23, right? And so that reflected a lot of feedback from a number of sources, including, our advocates and sponsors of the proponents of the policy. I mean, I think you guys have been a driving force and made this thing happen. So thank you for that. And it also involved in a lot of those smaller group discussions. Providing input and feedback. So it's had a lot of work with it. If the question is, has there been significant engagement with the policy language and objectives, I would say a resounding yes.
And then after a number of iterations, I went to some of the departments where the subject matter experts, for example. So it went to Whitney from Nutrition Services because there's a lot of language on what our expectations are, and she could give us the information of what is a realistic deliverable.
Or what
So
the
that-
federal food program requires you to do.
Right, so that we could, even though if we wanted to advocate certain things that were, some things we couldn't do given these other restrictions. The same with some of our other departments and the curriculum and what we're trying to do there and
Purchasing and
purchasing and contracts. And, so we try to be as thorough as possible to make sure that the policy is written is something that we can actually do and with fidelity. And I think we're there. Sorry.
okay. Great. So a lot of work has been done. And we have Shanice, do you want to share the groups that you have proposed would have a, sort of the next layer of community engagement.
I can share a little bit about our team, and I know we really want to just provide additional opportunities for students and members of the community to weigh on the community and really learn what opportunities arise from these conversations to inform next steps. And there's a number of groups in terms of student groups and community groups. So want to connect with our climate youth advisory or student council. In addition, we know a lot of students have been with the board and the district in a number of ways and want to engage with students as well. And in addition, involve our base community groups and our BSUs and tennis student unions and mentors and visit some classes. There's structures in our high school classes and middle school as well, where there might be a leadership class or an activity that can allow for some space to cheer students. So we're going to try to do that in community organizations like we'd like to involve Okano and Opal or even POIC is really being the community level around climate justice advocacy, and we want to engage with groups. So that's a little bit of thinking, and so late September, October, wanting to kind of think about that at a higher level, and we'll have to kind of make adjustments as we kind of learn about when the first draft will be ready.
So I have two questions. Thank you, Shanice. One, like community engagement can look a lot of ways. Like one could be like tell us what you think, like making suggestions about specific language, or like just generally share your thinking or your thoughts with perspective about something. So it's not as specific as like add this here. Do you think you'd be coming back with specific language or more like themes, or these are things that are missing, or it's too early to tell?
It's a good question, and I think we try to be pretty specific, not necessarily asking for folks to propose language in sessions, but might look at the most major parts of a policy and go, does this capture what you think? What is your insight or reactions? And so I think here, I know two of the overarching kind of goals of the, I think, policy are really that, engagement and preparedness piece around, learning about climate solutions and then emission reduction. So just running the kind of hear and affirm, from the student and community perspective, that those things, resonate and learn what the best ways to might capture that might look like. And I know a lot of that work, as you mentioned, has been done and led by folks in this room as well. And so wanting to just involve some key student groups and community groups in the process as well. That's kind of like the goal here. It's probably the focus conversation, but I'm open to feedback on, especially as we're at this maybe another stage of the policy, what makes most sense to kind of gather.
So and my other question was, would you be open to, if board or committee members wanted to join you for, listening session, or you, like, when we're joining to like, more be in a listening mode to the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that's happened in the past, and I know there's a number of different opportunities that would be great for people to listen in. So,
Is the best way for people to just tell you they're interested in that and then just work with Deputy you?
yeah, that works. You can share with me, and I'll get. I have a question about the climate policy. Now I'm deep green at solar panels and just trying to read for gas guzzlers.
Sounds like a side state.
I'm all went to graduate school for sustainable business, and so I'm a fan of it. But I would really like us to have more people of color involved. Like this is it says right at the top of the policy on climate impacts disproportionately impact even Portland, but globally communities of color. And we need to see communities of color at the table, like today, not in 2 weeks. We're engaging these community. You know, it also would provide a leadership opportunity for students of color who are very passionate about this work. I mean, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see us using all durables and, an electric fleet of buses and, district cars with a little bit solar panels on every building, lead platinum on every new building. But I also really at the same time like to see people of color on the table because it does impact. It's stronger coming from communities that are impacted. The ask I think is stronger coming from communities that are actually impacted.
I have a question for Amy, thinking about what Director DePaul said about communities of color. What was the outreach like, and who all has been part of this conversation? I've got the graphic up, and I see that you reached out to some groups that didn't respond. So, how have this the color formed, and the work that you've done so far?
So we tried to, in the graphic, like you said, feeling divided it between who we have responses from. The only group of color that we have response from was 14. We reached out to almost every group that Jimmy's mentioned. And we just didn't hear back. And I think it was a combination from what I've from talking to people, it's a combination. To it just wasn't a priority. So clearly are interested in growing focus.
And it was at the time that we did this outreach was 8 months ago, probably.
Yeah.
And then in between then and now, we sort of we haven't pushed again because we wanted to defer to the Shanice's process and not be like constantly knocking on someone's door, and help them be part of the formal process going forward. And also, but we are thinking we'd like to support this as much as possible, and we'd like to start reaching out to our contacts and just letting people know this is happening. As Director Madridge mentioned earlier, how do we alert people about the process is happening in the opportunity?
And I would just add to that, students too. We've had some feedback from students, but it just hasn't been. There hasn't been a lot of to that. It's sort of low-hanging fruit.
So it sounds like it's in alignment with sort of the groundwork you have done with certain groups, and it's more expansive, definitely focusing on, as we name it in the policy, those people who are most directly impacted that we're seeing again, the way racism works in our systems. And then also including more robust students. That to me sounds like a synthesis of sort of the work where we are.
Yeah, I can tell you professionally, we're starting to talk about when we're doing messaging, like race mask matching, and also less of a focus on the polar bear and on the ice flow, and more looking at direct impacts of communities of color. There are islanders, South Pacific Islanders, and other people around on other continents that have, on Hawaii even, that can really speak well to what it looks like from a on the ground perspective.
Remember that great poem that we worked on during the
Yes.
climate justice curriculum that we did as a board? Yeah,
That was, I can't remember the poet's name, but there's some amazing work being done, and we just, Portland wants to lead in this area. We need to lead with impact. But anyway, the idea of race matching is looking at who's doing the calling and who's doing the messaging, and it doesn't matter, I think, in terms of getting response.
so are we thinking like, I saw Julia on the agenda that this said, possible going out for a first reading. So are we, I don't think sounds like we have some more work to do before we get to that 21
Yes,
days.
I have possible action.
Yeah, it's impossible.
And I had conversations, and I want to have a separate conversation just overall generally about our community engagement as a community and how it's happened again. I think it's more respectful, like when it happens at the very beginning versus, hey, we did a lot of work and then so I just sit down and like, here's our work plan and which ones do we think we should find at the very beginning? So I say that's not gonna be all of them. We're kind of in a spot that like obviously didn't happen last December. I would, just given the fact that we had 115 degree day this last summer, and there's lots of data that shows here in Portland that the people who were most impacted by the heat and not having access to AC and everything else, for people of color and low-income people. And so to me, there's like, this is our community, like there is like very compelling reasons why we should, get going on getting our policy in place. So nothing today, but I would like to work with Shanice about how we figure out a timeline that we do incorporate that in the meeting engagement in a meaningful way and with policy. So started last December.
I heard Shanice say something about late September, early October. I'd really like us to try to get this before us by our first meeting in November. Just to try to, that would give us a couple months, but I think like we've been working on this for so long. I do think now is the moment to lead on this and to put some, not super urgency, but this is something that's important that I'd like us to focus on, and sort of we can adjust as life happens. But if we could say like this will be back for the policy committee by our first meeting in November, and then ready to head to the board, hopefully for both of them. That's kind of like where I'd like to sort of pencil in.
Put a bow on it.
Well, pencil it in, which can be erased, but just to help us keep our eye on the prize.
Great.
Because I know Michael's coming to these meetings, but maybe
It's like November 2nd, so
would be our policy committee meeting.
still have a date, so we can kind of back.
I'm all into back mapping. That's like,
That is your word.
pardon?
That's your word.
It is. But I want to make sure that we have opportunity to get so somewhere between today and the 2nd.
Well, so that would be our policy meeting would be October 9th before the November 2nd meeting. I was saying the first policy meeting.
Oh, policy, yes.
Yeah, which would be November 10th.
We'll also be looking at Ask Jackson, that if you have ideas of student groups that would be great for you. We had the climate march that went down to downtown.
The first building.
there were so many students there and like huge contingent from Roosevelt. So it's like, I know we have active students.
Well, and if we did vote on it in our November 10th meeting and we voted it out of committee, if there's a meeting the following week or December 14th, depending on what action is made. So, you know, it would be a year.
Let's try to get it done.
Before the first reading. The other one is November 16th. So that kind of gives us a sense of this stuff takes a while and we know the time it needs, but I also want us to move forward on it.
Yeah, it is urgent.
So, yeah, I mean, saw some.
There's this, what, 2 kids from Cleveland who did the strike every Friday with the signs out front. They were out there. They're still doing it.
I was thinking about the march with the middle schoolers. It wasn't necessarily march because their parents drove them to the location, but you're talking about the big march.
Yeah.
That was amazing downtown.
It was. I
I was there too.
felt very old.
Yeah.
It was great. I mean, I love saying like this is like leading in so many ways. Okay, so I had a good discussion. Anything else from us? I know we don't have a conversation about the schedule, but
We will set up some time and also.
okay. In terms of public comment, Dr. Jane, do you want to provide public comment now, or do you want to wait till the end? Pardon?
Now
it's great, yeah.
You don't want to like stay for the decisions?
So comfortable in here
Oh,
today.
wow.
Okay, so,
But we should thank you for staying on this kind of policy. It sounds like it's getting closer, and I just want to appreciate your, dogged, getting this through. Patience.
we're gonna get it through.
So I can go first.
Go ahead.
So we've covered a lot of what we wanted to say, but maybe just to get the point on. The collaboration did start about 2 years ago, and it was really a collaboration between the organization, the school, and the Justice Committee. And that really represents parents, teachers, students, community members, scientists, activists, I mean, a whole gamut of the community that's been involved in bringing this forward. One thing was really important to us, and it's reflected in what originally went to the policy committee, was that we worked with staff from all the departments in the district. So I know there was additional work obviously done with them during the meeting process, but there was a very intentional approach to it with staff as we developed this. Then, as you guys said, we worked with the committee for about 7 months. So in all, it has been 2 years cooking, refining, developing, and I think it's a good product. I think it's a good product, as you said today. On the feedback, we have gotten feedback from 20 separate organizations, and you can see already that I'm sent you the graphic. And then it was reset because there was an error in the graphic. And so a lot of groups were involved. The feedback we got was significant from a lot of groups, and this is what 20 or so versions of 40, probably 20 before to the policy. And we really think that this is comprehensive, thorough, and it's unlike what's being done in other school districts. It's really a unique piece of work. We're really excited about as we've said, we think that we just haven't really, or we really need to create a place for the communities of partnership to be leadership role and the students. I don't think that's going to be easy, but I think with the district's connections, it will happen. And so just in closing, pretty excited about this moving forward. We're excited about the work with the action. Do you want, we're gonna stay in touch. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
I'm Jane from forgive I have slightly more formal remarks, and I wasn't sure what was going to be discussed. So I think I'll just be sort of applauding what I heard today. Overall, we applaud PPS's demonstrated leadership on climate change and climate justice, including its support of teaching and learning in this area following Resolution 5272. The draft climate crisis response policy is an opportunity to continue to advance PPS's leadership by putting into policy both the operational GHG emissions reductions and also the community engagement, resilience, and wellness strategies that are related to climate justice. And we just really feel like now is the time to act. It is definitely a sense of urgency. In the wake of all the summer's extreme weather events, the call for action on this is coming from not only the traditional environmental advocacy groups. For example, for the first time ever at this scale on any topic, a collection of more than 200 prestigious health and medical journals jointly published an editorial this week. They're calling for swift action to combat climate change and declare the climate crisis to be the greatest threat to public health, to global public health. And they're asking governments to invest in the environmental crisis with a degree of funding and urgency that we see for the pandemic. And just sort of as a related side note, in past meetings, we've discussed climate leadership among other jurisdictions. Since then, we've seen Seattle Public Schools adopt a resolution. In February, they committed to transitioning the district to 100% clean renewable energy by 2040. Some custom strategies within that. So in summary, we're excited about the policy, really supportive of its content. There's a few areas that maybe we'd love to, add some specific language to, and we'll probably hear more during the public comment. But overall, we'd be thrilled to see TPS adopt this policy and more formally continue its efforts on climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you both for staying with us through the meeting and many of the policy committee meetings.
We now because we're so
Where was that editorial or the?
Well, the New York Times, there's an article in the Times yesterday referencing it. And it was in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, and two of the more kind of main organizations. Journals.
yeah, I have a copy of it.
Okay, I'll check the New York Times.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Bill. Second to last item on the agenda is decisions. Liz, do you want to, or Mary, one of you, whichever. The other thing I should have said at the very beginning is committee meetings generally just formal. So hopefully everybody's offended by any of the informality. But I think we get more work done that way.
Well, I appreciate things like being able to ask them a question that directly, I was just curious and wanted more information about what Michelle was saying. So I appreciate the informality if we can just engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will allow us to move things quicker. So hopefully everybody's okay with that.
Absolutely. And the 2040, that date is really important in climate change and just in general, because that's the date approximately it's projected that the US will have more than 50% people of color. Most of them will be young, definitely younger than all of us. So definitely me. I'll speak for myself. So yeah, so that's why it's 2021 important to get that leadership now ahead of when we're going to need it, because our demographics. Including actually they will have grown over it and they are changing. According to the census report.
Mary, are you the rescission queen?
Sure, I'll be the rescission queen.
Oh, we need to get you a little tiara and sash.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is have, like, present each one. I'm gonna ask committee members whether they have any issues with, us moving ahead, if there are questions or issues with us moving ahead to make a recommendation. Go through them one by one. If there's not any issues, then we'll just.
If we vote like the Roman emperors, if we want them to be killed and then we go do the thumbs down.
You know what?
No killing in policy. There's no killing in policy.
It's not even what everybody wants to be.
We're killing them.
All right, the first one, I'm gonna bring, I don't know how you're gonna, you do thumbs up, thumbs down. Is the Health and Welfare Trust Fund, 550073. Oh, yes. Carol Merrill, my assistant. Did you do this like the, yes, please. Okay.
Really well.
Is it really a policy? What it says, it just is text that says.
I need a picture of this, Liz. Modeling the policy.
I had my sound. It says, see the provisions in the professional agreement, because this, the Health and Welfare Trust Fund, it's about our represented employees and they handle it there. So the provisions are in each of the CBAs and not here. So
There are no provisions.
there are no provisions in it. It just says go someplace else. So it's
The
not.
board has already acted on.
And the board has already acted on it. So that is the first one for you to,
Kill. We're gonna do it at the end.
okay.
Keep going.
So the next one, 560040, is administrator consultations. It was adopted, thank you, Liz, in 1971, good year. But it's based on a statute that's been repealed, it doesn't exist anymore. So we are recommending that this be rescinded as well. The third one is a 570054 compensation miscellaneous. Another 1971 policy amended in 1972. OSBA, well, this is one of the ones that OSBA did review in our, and they recommended decision. Our staff has also recommended decision on this. The information that's contained in this policy is something that is received by the board annually. We vote on it annually. We need it because it's information in the budget book. So it makes more sense that you continue getting up-to-date information on an annual basis. So we're recommending a decision on this as well.
Do they have any questions about that?
The final one, I don't know if you
Just
took it.
that, I mean, there's still, the language is like secretaries, It's
Yeah, it's
almost like Mad Men. Not Mad Men, but-
1971.
Yeah.
The final one is 570060.
My favorite is where it just says history ...
Yeah, we don't know when this, we have another personnel file, a personnel file policy. We have two currently. This one isn't a policy. It says, look to the CBA, essentially, so we're asking that this be rescinded. The other, I didn't include the one that we're not asking to be rescinded, but you can you'll see that has substantive information.
It probably does need to be amended, but it also probably has to be bargained. So
That's not
the second personnel policy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But this one doesn't say anything that is particularly useful to anyone who's looking for guidance.
It doesn't say anything, period.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are recommending that should be. For you today.
Okay, any questions about the last one?
What does history ... mean, Liz?
I don't know.
It's exciting.
We have to go to the legislative history to resolve that ambiguity in the text.
Okay, so since committees don't actually vote on things,
Well, we can vote to bring it
well,
forward, right?
we're making a recommendation, we're not deciding.
Right.
I'd like to move that we recommend the decisions that were on the agenda. So second.
Can I just ask a point of clarification, because I think for the two, you don't want to rescind these.
The vacation
You want to
one.
work on the other, you want to save those for.
I want to do it as a group because I don't want to get balled up on like, hey, you're rescinding something and that has been replaced with.
Even though this one is, okay.
So
Yeah,
it's
I
just the
just-
first floor.
And so like, why does that one, the other one?
I just want to make sure, because it was presented in some of the board packets differently, and so I just want to make sure.
So Julia, I think technically what's on the agenda is to rescind all of those policies. So I think what you want us to do is just rescind the first four on the agenda. Which are the four that Mary
Again,
described.
I think the agenda is accurate. I think the board book.
The board book.
is not. I
Okay,
think the formal agenda.
sorry,
is
I
accurate. So,
Yeah.
That's the ambiguity.
So, yeah, so the three
The four
references
you just
to vacation,
Yeah.
the three policies that reference vacation.
we are not rescinding,
We're not
but
doing-
the four we just read through, yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
So
sorry.
they will be.
Your motion is correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought you said you did want to lump them all together, but not that one, not the.
No, I'm saying lumping the ones that were. on
Just
the-
read.
So every meeting, there will be a section that is just rescissions. And again, they're to be like super easy ones. Until we agree we're ready to go to the next stage. So these are just the ones that were, just the ones that Mary's with.
Health and welfare trust, administrative consultant, compensation miscellaneous, and personnel.
Okay, so we have,
You got your motion in a second, so we just need to vote.
yeah, all in favor.
Aye.
Awesome.
And so I'll have my
Microphone,
next
but just, yeah. Okay, the passes will be recommending it to the next,
First reading on Tuesday.
and, I think there is like a memo from last time that. Just, yeah, and probably, if I could just like do a brief, like. Intro to get people used to like these things are coming, and here's what they are, and I'll also try and talk to Gary Berman and I think they all have not been.
So absolutely, appreciate the focus on brief.
Yeah, no,
I'm gonna try to, I mean, you were talking really about work-life balance and the meetings that we put up to operation.
well,
But yeah, I think that's great.
I'm about ready to give you 15 minutes back to.
What?
Is
this a new friend?
No, so just to be clear, next meeting, we're gonna have a discussion about the kind of timing on the climate policy community engagement. We'll have some rescissions. Hopefully we'll have a revised policy on policy and a vacation policy and a work plan.
Yes.
Wow.
Everybody good with that?
Rescissions. That'll be like a standing agenda item for this week, Rescissions.
Hopefully, until we run
Go
out of.
from a Bible to like a.
Well, like I said, I think it does diminish, it diminishes the work when people look at it and be like, this stuff is irrelevant or it's outdated. And so really what we want to, is like, these are the things that are important and they're actually the guiding, what should be guiding.
As we look at rescissions, Julia, and you called me yesterday and asked about, things in my mind about policy. I'm concerned about the way that the review of Dr. Proctor's contract happened. I know it's in policy that the board reviews senior leadership contracts, but I know that's not actually a practice we've had for 15 years. And so it felt really weird that when it was a Black woman's contract, that suddenly the board was engaged in that process. And so I'd really like us to have a conversation about how we do that, where that's in policy, where it's in practice, and maybe rescinding some of that policy as well. So
Well, I think that's a much bigger conversation because there's a lot of history and actually, I think we did Sean's first.
Yeah.
when he moved out.
Yeah, so it was the first time the district realized that we were in violation of policy. Doing that practice. And there's a whole history about why.
Yeah, I just think that I've been uncomfortable with that. So I think that would be a really good thing for us to look at in policy. who that applies to, how we hire senior staff, and what that contract looks like.
I
And
think,
just have some clarity.
yeah, and as it's come forward, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, and the history is important there too, because of who's benefited by the policy, so I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of history. I mean, I was really involved in first writing it, and there was a huge lack of accountability, and some pretty abusive practices, that occurred, and we just paid a lot of money, unnecessarily.
But just as someone who's been on the board for 2 years, when that happened with Sean and Cheryl, it just felt like,
So there was two ways.
so they're just, so it's just something I'd like us to visit and talk about as we work towards becoming an anti-racist board, how these things show up, how they make us feel, to have those uncomfortable conversations and to work through it so that it isn't a barrier, but so that we're really clear we can be holding people accountable.
And staff is working on bringing proposed changes for the board, for the policy committee's consideration to the administrative compliance policy. So I think everyone has an interest in being in compliance with policy, having the policy serve the right governance, oversight, and accountability measures in ways that allow people to be hired and peak hiring season. And so no surprises, and governance protects decision makers, right? So we want to make sure that the governance is clear, so the decision makers can make decisions. And so I think because that emerged this summer and those conversations were, I know legal and HR have been working on what system of governance makes sense here to meet the board's needs in the administration business.
And I think these are the conversations we continue to have, but I think you're right, like we need to be
And
we're holding accountability, and we also need to be having these super conversations.
there's kind of two different ways that could have happened. So like, I don't think anybody said anything at the board meeting. A way that could have been done is, hey, the district's been out of compliance for X number of years, and like, we're getting back in compliance. So to me, it was hey, we're getting just back into compliance. So it weren't a big announcement at a meeting of like, why we're doing something that way. Like I said, I don't know if there was any discussion for either of those contracts at the meeting.
No, there wasn't discussion for either of the contracts at the meeting, but there was prior discussion of why are we suddenly doing this, especially for our Black contract, and that there is the rules and being in compliance, and then there are experience, and there's also fee, right? And so those are 3 different things, and they all carry some important weight. And so yes, we're getting back into compliance. There's a bigger question about how we do that, who it shows up for, and what our practice is going to be going forward.
Yeah, well,
And so that's a big conversation.
frankly, it should be everybody. And like, all the people who got hired should have been through that practice. And like, I can't speak.
I think that's a bigger conversation though, because I'm not actually sure that I agree with that, but that's why we need to look at the
Okay,
policy.
but that's what our policy is.
But that's why I'm saying that, Julia, I'm saying that that's one of the policies I'd like us to bring forward, and it sounds like it's something we are going to.
Okay, what I'm just saying though, it's when we have a policy, it's not like, hey, we aren't going to comply with it. And part of the reason actually why it even came up was because of some litigation of like, how did something get in somebody's contract because we have this policy.
Yes, and I think that sometimes we fall back on policy and rules and litigation in ways that are quite dominant. So I think, yes, we need to be in compliance. Yes, there's a legal path. Yes, I understand why this happened. And we need to have the bigger conversation about the ramifications of this.
It's a conversation who benefits and who's burdened. Who is historically benefited, who's historically burdened. And doing that, that matrixing, when we understand why we're doing something, we're every employer in the city is dealing with this right now. People are hiring people of color for change. And now, rules are being, we're recognizing that a lot of our HR policies impact people of color because we're hiring people of color.
So I think one thing that was important is like, we vote on principles and like everybody else's, so I don't know why it would be any different.
Well, we should talk about it. I think this is a great test case for just having I'm not uncomfortable with these are conversations, by the way.
Yeah,
I
I'm not.
like them, I
But there's a
don't.
reason for it, and also, and there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of history of PPS being like generally a bad actor in this space, and which is why the policy, and it wasn't.
But just for the public record, I'm not aware of any of bad actor allegations. In the
Okay, that's a
last
technically a legal term, sorry.
Okay.
I didn't mean to use like,
You're going back to 2000, the early 2000s.
yeah,
just
that's why
specific-
the whole reason why the policy got put in place, because we had several huge buyouts and then probably one of the largest time arbitrations because of a contract that got put in place by the person who was the head of HR at the time.
And I would say that I think the reason that you raised this policy and brought it forward for these contracts was out of the desire to make sure the district is being accountable, that the board had clarity around contracts, but it wasn't anything other than that. And I think we need to look at our processes and our policies and the way we act and how that can crop up or not, closer to white dominance, and how we look at what does it mean when we haven't followed a policy and then we begin following it again? How do we communicate that about that? How do we think about that as a whole? So that's all I'm
I
saying.
think that's a great conversation because,
Yeah.
for example, when I asked about the vacation policy, so to say like that's outdated, it's like, well, it's still a policy. It can't just be like staff. This, how to say this. We've had a lot of transitions, so like, hey, this is the practice that we have, and it's like, well, then, but that doesn't mean just because that became the practice of the policies. Like, there's a way to revise policy versus if you think it's outdated or practices have changed, but it's not just like we're going to ignore the policy and then like adopt a new practice that is not in line with policy. So I think your question is this, like, what do we do when we haven't been in alignment? Because there was a number of years when like people just didn't, and a whole host of things. That's why we're changing the vacation policy.
And I think it's worthy to have this conversation about when we have practices and when we have rules, how do we navigate, right? And how do we, I think some of us will say, well, the rules always trump. Some of us will say the practice always trumps. And I think part of our work as a board as we bring these two things together is to do that with thought and care, especially with the next type of system.
Yeah. But I guess this is big things like if the board has a policy, if there's a board policy on something, that is the policy. And practice doesn't trump policy if there's a policy.
But if
You
there's
can attempt to change the
resolutions-
policy or get rid of the policy, but the policy is still guiding.
But I push back on that because if our practices aren't in alignment with the policy, then the policy only carries as much weight as either our lawsuit brings to it or our practice. So I think this is a bigger conversation. And I do think ultimately where we'd like to be is our rules and our practices in alignment. But in those places where they're out of alignment, I think we need to have a deeper conversation about practice and rules. And maybe it's rescinding the policy or modifying it rather than modifying our practice. So I think that's a place where this policy committee is going to have some interesting work.
Yeah, and there'll be some interesting accountability conversations as well, because, to me, it's like the legislature passes a statute and the people's practices, like, we don't actually follow the law. It's not like, well, the practice becomes the law. It's like, if you don't like the law, then I think the law should be changed, and the law should be changed.
Well, our practice with HR, I think one of the things you said was with the resolutions passed that made the HR practice happen. So then the board is sort of within conflict in itself of passing resolutions that say one thing, while policies say another. And so
Well, I guess
think
that's why I asked to see that resolution.
So it's our work to sort of unpack that and help bring us into alignment, whatever that alignment we decide as a board looks like.
But what happened is when the district discovered it was not in compliance with the policy, the very first contract that came up was Schomburg's. And it was listed as like anything else, just an agenda item. And it got adopted. And I think I asked to see one of the contracts, and then in response, it got sent to everybody else. I actually asked to see both of them, I'm pretty sure. So, whether there was a conversation about it, it wasn't, it didn't start with, it started with the first person who, when we discovered that we were out of compliance with the policy, to correct it, which is good practice. Anyway, and now we're 1:06. Okay,
Still, it's better than, that's good.
all right.
It's not 7.
That was an important step. So,
Thank you, everybody. And anything else for the good of the others? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.